trying to connect with.
Alright. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. Yes, Jazma, if you are ready, we can listen to the Arabic of fourth flash and then move on from there.
Yes, Abi, very quickly, I am making it. Yes.
اللمعة الرابعة فكما أن أشنع البلاهات. اللمعة الرابعة فكما أن الكتاب لو كان مكتوبا يكفي له قلم واحد لواحد، ولو كان مطبوعا يلزم لطبعه أقلام بعدد حروفه على شكل حروفه، واشتراك كثيرين لتصنيع تلك الأقلام أي الحروف الحديدية، ولو كتب بخط دقيق أكثر الكتاب في بعض الكلمات، كما قد تكتب سورة ياسين في كلمة ياسين، فحينئذ لا بد لطبع تلك الكلمة الواحدة أقلام حديدية بعدد حروف أكثر الكتاب. كذلك هذه الكائنات إذا قلت إنها مكتوبة بقلم الواحد الأحد سلكت طريقا سهلا معقولا في نهاية السهولة بدرجة الوجوب، وإذا أسندتها إلى الطبيعة وإلى الأسباب سلكت طريقا في نهاية الصعوبة بدرجة الامتناع، وفي نهاية عدم المعقولية بدرجة المحالية، لأنه يلزم على الطبيعة أن تحضر لطبع كل حي كل ما يلزم لأكثر الكائنات، فهذه من الخرافات التي تمجها الأوهام، بل لابد أن توجد في كل جزء من التراب والماء والهواء إما ملايين مطبعات معنوية وماكينات مستترة فيه حتى بعدد الأزهار والأثمار، ليمكن تشكل هاتيك الأزاهير والثمرات المتخالفة الجهازات والماهيات، وإما فرض وجود قدرة قادرة على تصنيع جميع النباتات، ووجود علم بلا نهاية محيط بتفاصيل جميع خواص جميع الأشجار والمتزهرات وجهازاتها وموازينها في كل جزء من التراب والماء والهواء، بل كل جزء من هذه الثلاثة يصلح أن يصير منشأ لتشكل كل النباتات أو أكثرها. فافرض قصعة تراب ثم افرض دخول كل بذر ونواة فيها على التعاقب، ثم أفرغ القصعة واملأها من صبرة التراب حتى تكيل كل التراب، ترى النتيجة واحدة على أن المشهود يكفيك، إذ تشاهد في سيرك في الأرض منشية أكثر أجزاء التراب لأكثر النباتات، مع أن تشكل كل واحد من النباتات المزهرة والمثمرة مخالف لكل واحد منها، وكل واحد منها له من الانتظام والاتزان والامتياز طرز خاص وخصوصية تستلزم جهازات مخصوصة وماكينة خاصة ومطبعة تخصه، بل تستلزم وجود كل جهازات تشكيل تمام الشجرة والنبات في كل واحد من نواته وبذره، مع بساطة البذور والنواتات وتشابهها. فيلزم على الطبيعة أن تحضر معنا جهازات تشكل كل الأشياء وماكيناتها المعنوية وأسبابها في كل شيء، فهذه سفسطة يتنفر منها السفسطائي أيضا، وخرافة يخجل منها من يضحك الناس بنقل الخرافات.
Okay, so let's read the translation from beginning to end once, and then we go back to the beginning and reflect upon it together, inshallah. As I said, the fourth and fifth flashes are very similar or connected in content, so if we can, it would be worth trying to get to through the fifth too, inshallah, today. So, Bismillah. If a book is scribed, a single pen in the hand of a single person would be sufficient. Scribe meaning if somebody wrote it by hand. A single pen in the hand of a single person would be sufficient. But If it is printed, the printing would require as many pens as the book's characters in the shape of each graphic character, as well as the involvement of many in making those pens, that is, cast iron types. Then, if the majority of the book is written with fine script within some of the words, in the way that the text of the Quranic chapter, Yasin, Surah al-Yasin, is written in the word Yasin, then as many iron pens as the characters of the majority of the book will be necessary to print that one word. Likewise, if you say that this great cosmos is inscribed with the pen of a single one, al-Wahid al-Ahad, you would take an easy and reasonable path, the ease of which reaches the degree of necessariness. But if you attribute it to nature or the causes, the path you would take would be difficult at the level of untenability. We could also say prohibition for here, but I use the word prohibition for something else. So at the level of untenability, and unreasonable at the level of inconceivability. The host, okay, inconceivability, because this would require nature to procure everything that is required for the majority of the cosmos in order to print each living being. And this is a superstition that even fanciful supposition will not contain and will spit out. In fact, either millions of metaphysical printers and even as many invisible machines as the number of flowers and fruits will have to exist in every particle of soil, water, and air in order to constitute these flowers and fruits with differing organs and qualities, or a power that has the power to make all the plants as well as infinite and all-encompassing knowledge of all the detailed aspects of all the properties of all trees and flowering plants, along with the equipment and measures needed to give shape to them, will have to be assumed to exist in every particle of soil, water, and air. Because every particle of these three things has the capacity to constitute a hotbed for the growth of all plants, or most of them. Or rather, the intonation should be more like, because every particle of these three things has the capacity to constitute a hotbed for the growth of all plants, or most of them. Now, assume a pot of soil, then assume every kernel and seed entering it in turns. Then empty the pot and fill it again from a heap of soil until you go through the entire heap. You will see that the outcome is the same. Observation will be sufficient to grasp this, because when you travel the earth, you observe that most samples of soil constitute a hotbed for most plants, even as the form that each flowering or fruit-bearing plant takes is different from another. Each one of these plants has an individual and specified orderliness, proportionality, and distinctiveness that require peculiar equipment, specific machines, and a designated print house. In fact, they each require the existence in every seed or kernel of all the equipment needed to give shape to the entirety of the tree or plant, despite the simplicity of kernels and seeds along with their mutual resemblance. In that case, nature has to procure, metaphysically, the equipment by which each thing is constituted along with their metaphysical machines and causes. And this is a sophistry that will disgust even the sophists, or a superstition that will shame even those who make people laugh by narrating superstitions. So this is the text. Ustad Nursi has a very vivid imagination and memory. So we should also try to visualize these things as we read, because once we visualize it, it's going to probably make more sense. Like he says, printer, scribe, pot of soil. Oh, these are very concrete examples. And once we visualize and grasp those concrete examples, then we put the abstract concepts and realities in the patterns, in the cognitive thought patterns that that bring about in our minds, and then it becomes easier to understand those concepts. So we should try to do that, inshallah. So let's go to the beginning and try to reflect upon it together. As always, please feel free to jump in, and this is not a this should not be rather a one person show. Inspiration is from God, and it's coming to everybody. So please feel free to jump in at any point. If a book is scribed, a single pen in the hand of a single person would be sufficient. Now, it might be somewhat difficult for us to visualize this today because we are living in the 21st century. When we say book, what we understand is a volume, two covers, and printed pieces of paper between those. We purchase it from the bookshop or now even online. It comes, nicely packaged and, neat, etc., etc. That was not the case throughout most of history. Mankind seems to be able to write things in the past 6,000 years or so. What we visualize as book today, right, is something maybe last 200 years or so, maybe 300 years, 400 years. Even after the discovery of the print machine, it did not come to the point that we have now. For most people who were literate and who wanted to collect books, who wanted to learn, right, they had to find a copy of the book and scribe it, write it, copy it by hand, or have somebody scribe it for them. I used to work on, or I'm still doing that, Muslims of the Russian Empire, and I read this, there was a biographical dictionary, which means small biographical sketches of people, especially they do this for like scholars and famous people, etc. One of the persons featured in that biographical dictionary, written in the early 20th century, the man says, I am 90-something years old. So this is a note found at the end of a book that this man has scribed, and then it made it into the biographical dictionary. So this old scholar who has died by that point, right, says, I am 90-something years old. I have burning sticks, not even candles, burning sticks, and scribed in its light all my life. They say that there's something called a candle. I haven't seen it. I use like burning sticks, like it's the wood, like the wood with sap, right? Pine wood and things like that. He says, I have scribed about 200 books. Maybe I won't be able to do it any longer. Maybe this will be the last one. And it turns out to be the last book that the man scribes. SubhanAllah. Anyway, so try to visualize that, right? If a book is scribed, a single pen in the hand of a single person would be sufficient. And Ustad Nursi is coming from that background, like this is real for him. But the printing press is also real for him, that he sees that later in his life too. But if the book is printed, the printing would require as many pens as the book's characters, and the shape of each graphic character, as well as the involvement of many in making those pens, that is cast iron types. And then when he says print, again, we need to think of something other than what we imagine print as. Like you might be going to, what was the name of this, Staples, or something like a copy store, and ask them like, print this for me. What happens is they enter it into the computer and it comes out of a printing machine, and everything comes out of a single printing machine. This is not it. When he says, when Ustad Nursi says printing here, that's not what he's meaning. He means the typesetting, right? Each letter would be cast in iron, or more often lead, or a mix of iron and lead, right? So I don't know how many characters are there here. Let's try to figure that out, right? Okay. Actually, I need to go here. You're probably not seeing what I'm doing on the screen now. I'm getting the word count of this paragraph that we are reading. So there are 823 characters in this paragraph that I selected. So in order to write this, in order to print this, you had to have 823 single pieces, letters, right? Cast iron so we call it graphic characters. And then you would have, them in boxes, a box of A's, a box of B's, a box of C's. And you would pick, like, the first letter is I, you would pick the I and place it there on a legend, and then pick F and place it there, and then pick a space and place it there, and pick A, and then pick space, pick B, right? So this is typesetting. When Ustad Nursi says printing, this is what he has in mind. And that's what we need to try to visualize too. So that said, let's read that sentence again. If a book is scribed, a single pen in the hand of a single person would be sufficient. But if it is printed, the printing would require as many pens as the book's characters in the shape of each graphic character. So when he says pen here, he is using it in a metaphorical sense in order to refer to each letter, graphic character, each cast type, right? As well as the involvement of many in making those pens, because those cast types have to be made in advance. So you have the printing house, you have the print setter, the typesetter, and a person who is doing this meticulous life or meticulous work. And then you have to have somebody who prepares the molds for those type characters, and then somebody who casts them. And then that has to be made with iron or lead. So you have to have a miner to extract the lead and the iron or whatever it is made of from the ground, and purify that, make it into pig iron or raw lead. And then you have to have a fireplace where this is going to be melted. Imagine all of these. Each letter, this, I'm going to highlight, I think you are seeing this. I, right? This I requires all of that. The mine in the ground, the miner who needs to extract it, the person who's going to purify the mine and make it into, let's say, pure lead, the person who is going to prepare the fireplace, somebody has to prepare the mold, somebody has to pour the melted lead and pour it into the mold and make hundreds of thousands of these. Right? All of this has to be there for each letter. If it is printed, the printing would require as many pens as the book's characters in the shape of each graphic character, as well as the involvement of many in making those pens, that is, cast iron types. Then, if the majority of the book is written, so that's not all of it, there is more to this. There is more. If the majority of the book is written with fine script within some of the words, so when we say the book, right, let's make this more concrete. Here is a book. This is the words in Turkish, right? This is book. So if the majority of the book, so this is how many pages? 700, almost 800 pages. Let's say majority would mean like 600 pages. If the words, all the characters, words, meanings, that is in 600 pages of this book, right, was written with fine script within some of the words. Let's take, the first word, like Bismillah, Bismillah is the beginning of all that is good, right? If 600 pages of this was written in fine script in those, 4 or 5 words, in the way that the text of the Quranic chapter, Yasin, so imagine the entire Surah al-Yasin, about like 6 pages or so, right? Written in the word Yasin, in those 2 letters. And some of the brothers here might have visited Ustad Nursi's house in Sparta in Turkey, which is now a museum. There you can see what Ustad Nursi is referring to, because, or at least when I visited, it was there. I suppose it's still there. He had this tableau, he had this printed Yasin, written in the, formula is Yasin, right? 2 letters, but the entire chapter is written in the frame of those letters. So he was probably looking at that. In the way that the text of the Quranic chapter Yasin is written in the word Yasin, then as many iron pens as the characters of the majority of the book will be necessary to print that one word. So imagine what an amazing effort this would require. Right? Each character requires so much work, and then you are writing the whole book in each character. Therefore, for each character, you are requiring as much work as that is needed for the majority of the book. So that is the image that we need to have in our minds before we move on and try to understand what Ustad Nursi is, where Ustad Nursi is trying to take us to with this. Likewise, if you say that this great cosmos is inscribed with the pen of a single one, al-Wahid al-Ahad, and again, Ustad Nursi never uses these words, the names of gods, the names of God, randomly. If he said al-Wahid al-Ahad together, he has something in mind. And we may get there or not, but I think we already talked about the difference between Wahid and Ahad when we were doing the flashes on live. So if you were here, if you listened to that, try to flash back to it and try to remember, right? One in Al-Wahid is God's manifestation on everything altogether, and Ahad is the manifestation of God's names, most or many of God's names, or sometimes all of God's names, concentration of it on a single thing, right? So Al-Wahid would be then the entire book, and then Ahad would be Yasin written in the letters Yasin, right? If you say that this great cosmos is inscribed with the pen of a single one, you would take an easy and reasonable path, the ease of which reaches the degree of necessariness. So if you are thinking about the possibility of things intellectually, right, we don't know which one. We are just imagining this, right?
Going into that paragraph, can I ask a question regarding to the first one?
Sure, please.
Yeah, when we think about a single book, yeah, what Ustad says here, totally true. But when we think about multiple copies of that book, printing press is much more easier than writing by hand. So how we should understand that part?
Okay, I have something in mind, but maybe some other brother might have an idea.
I mean, what comes to my mind is, I guess there's probably a similar question at the end of the treatise on nature, the Petrsalesi, I think, and what I can recollect is that it is not a copy. Nothing is a copy in the universe. That everything is, although there are similarities, everything is unique, right? I mean, every human being, for example, we have commonalities, and that probably also looks at the name of Wahid, like single nose, 2 eyes, 2 ears, very common features, but at the same time, each face is unique, right? And each person and personality is unique. So in that sense, nothing in the universe, although we have like flowers very similar to each other, all of them are actually unique. And that is, in that sense, nothing is actually a copy of each other, but we can probably also increase the number of examples in that, but that's what I can recollect from that part, but there could be other explanations, I imagine.
Yeah, yes, mashallah. Jazma, did you want to say something? I saw your mic go up.
The same meaning, Mustafa abi, beautifully explained, abi. Everything is uniquely created. Nothing is similar to another thing. So each human being is
identical.
created uniquely. Every animal or plant is showing different manifestations of Asma Ilahiyya. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making everything, creating everything. Maybe so similar to each other, but they are showing different meanings, different manifestation of Asma Ilahiyya. It's not like printing a book in many copies of a book, but everything is created in a different way. Yes.
Yes, mashallah, jazakumullah khair. And that's the answer. When we move on to the reality of that example, it should become more clear because again, we use those examples, representations first to set a cognitive pattern in our minds, but the reality is always more complex and sublime than that, and there will be more details to account for when we talk about the reality of that. In reality, there is never identicality, right? There is never sameness. In Turkish and Arabic too, it's going to be the same words. There is mithliyet, but there is not ayniyet. There is similarity, but there is no identicality. There is no sameness. Right? Things may be similar, reminiscent of one another, but it's never the same. So if each copy of the book is a little bit different than the other, and each character of each copy of each book is a little bit different from one another, then what happens is that you cannot use the same typeset for each one of them. So for each book, then you have to have a different typeset put in place. Each tree is different from the other. Each planet is different from the other. Each human being is different from the other. Each atom is different from the other. Each subatom, whatever that is, like the smallest thing, particle that you can go to, like it is different from the other. These are all manifestations of God's names and attributes. But this is a notion that goes, at least as far as I can tell, all the way to Ibn al-Arabi, right? God never manifests himself in the same way twice. Each manifestation is a little bit different, a little bit different, a little bit different. So likewise, if you say that this great cosmos is inscribed with the pen of a single one, al-Wahid al-Ahad, you would take an easy and reasonable path, the ease of which reaches the degree of necessariness. So that's what we were doing. Like, think about possibilities. There is a question, we don't know the answer, but we then think about likelihoods. So the first possibility was very difficult. It's not that likely. It's, I don't think that that's what it is, because it would be very difficult for this to happen. Like, so many things would have to come together. And then another one, yeah, maybe, but, and then the third one, maybe, but the fourth one, well, it must be that, because like it's so likely, right? If we have a set number of possibilities, out of those possibilities, the one that is the easiest for the mind becomes necessary. If the mind has to choose one of them and the range of possibilities is limited, choosing the easiest one becomes necessary for the intellect. That's what the intellect does, right? You would take an easy and reasonable path, the ease of which reaches the degree of necessariness. But
yeah, Assalamu
yes, alaikum assalam.
I was driving, so I'm in the car, but I'm about to park. But I couldn't stop myself to reply to Muharrem's question, because it is my question also for a long time. We are trying to explain with Ahadiyat's perception, like there's some differences in every creation. However, I think this is not the thing to concentrate to reply to Muammer's question, Muharrem's question, Muammer's question. The thing is, Ustad's example, in a way, is not valid this time. I mean, because the printing services today, maybe they are much more efficient compared to writing, but the way he presents this example, as you mentioned at the beginning, we should think like which type of printing you study is talking about. So, of course, he's not talking about this modern printing services, which is much more efficient than handwriting. So I think we cannot justify this example with today's printing example. But I think the point he is taking is I'm using the analogy from mathematics. I think continuous versus discrete. You know, since they are engineers, and you will be understanding in better way. It's like this universe is like looks like a continuous optimization. When you talk about continuous optimization, everything is easier. But when you think about discrete optimization, everything is with many pieces, and these pieces are selected individually, like in this printing example. So if you are to choose every mold, that means it's a combinatorial problem, which is a discrete optimization problem. And this discrete optimization problem is actually what is called NP hard. It's a very hard problem, hard to solve, and it's not easy at all. But if it's continuous, if it is flowing, it's like the pencil writing continuously. So if we have this continuous paradigm, we can see that it should be definitely easier. I think this was the point I started with, just to share.
Al-Arabi, could you tell us more about the difference between continuous optimization and discrete optimization? I'm
for example, you know,
poor historian doesn't understand.
Yeah, for example, derivatives, right? You take derivative, let's say first derivative of a function, let's say, and you say that it is equal to 0, and you find the best solution to this objective function, let's say. It is very simple, it's computationally efficient, and you find the best solution because it's a continuous function. But if the function is not continuous, of course, I'm making everything so simple with many assumptions, but everybody knows that if it's a discrete problem, then you cannot definitely have a closed form solution like this. Then you have to use different algorithms, and you should, even if you rely the best computational power, everybody knows that this type of discrete problems are impossible to solve in general. This is why in mathematics they are put into a category which is called NP hard. There is no known efficient algorithm to solve this type of problems. It's like enumeration. You need to make enumeration, and there are infinitely many possibilities to pick from these discrete options. But if it is continuous, you know that it's as simple as taking derivatives. I'm making everything very simple to talk about, but everybody knows,
right?
yes, but everybody knows if it's a continuous problem, it's easier to solve.
So I'm still trying to understand. So when you say continuous, does that mean that there is a pattern that we can follow? Or when you
for
say
example, I mean, continuous, usually we talk about variable. Let's say that x is continuous variable. That means x can take any fractional value, like 3.117, whatever. But when you talk about discrete optimization, you're talking about 3, 4, 5, you know, exact integer numbers, for example. So that makes solution spaces totally different, and that makes search algorithms totally different to find the best solution to any problem.
And which one did you make the analogy to? Like, which one is
the
which?
analogy I'm saying, the using the pencil, it's like continuous optimization. Everything is flowing, and solution space is continuous. That means by some, let's say, nice algorithm, you easily find the solution in the analogy if it is continuous. But if it's the enumeration problem, if it's the integer problem, discrete optimization problem, then you are in trouble. Even small instances of problems are almost practically impossible to solve with any computational power, because by theory, you don't have any efficient algorithm to apply for.
So can we say that, I mean, it is much straightforward.
Just the approach, I think,
yeah.
if you perceive everything continuously, And I think our hearts work this way in connection. Our hearts perceive everything continuous. You have the meaning continuous. There is no discretization. But our akal works in a discrete way, in a sequential way. Even the way we perceive by akal is discrete, I would say. This is why also akal cannot easily grasp meaning. It has to think, it has to divide and conquer type of stuff. It is really hard for the akal to get into the meaning, I would say. Even it works with the faculties of human. This is what I'm trying to match.
Can we give an example of like a circle versus a polygon? Like a circle is continuous, like it has infinite points, so it's, you know, easier, I guess, to make that. But if you had to join dots, like infinite number of dots, that would be much more complex, right, to form a polygon like that. So is that something similar that we can use as an analogy?
You can reflect. What I'm trying to scratch over is, I think Ustad is talking about continuous being continuous versus being discrete.
Yeah.
In mathematical sense.
Like basically, if you're looking at a curve, like when you're looking at a sine curve, it's basically continuous. But if you look at like a bar graph, it has many separate bars, and it would have to be an infinite number of bar graphs, which would be very, very complex, versus just like a curve.
That's true, definitely, yes, exactly. Maybe it is closer to match my analogy. When you look at paragraphs, as you say, even the letters, when you look at them as numbers, every letter, and you're trying to match this number to get a meaning, so that's an NP complete problem, I would say. It's a very hard problem. But if you treat these letters all together flowing continuously, then it's very easy to generate best solution for it, which is the meaning.
This brought my mind and theory that by the philosophers. I'm not sure if it matches Harun Abi's problem, but I want to mention it as an application to this. They claim this big explosion, Big Bang, and then the universe started to expand, and then they say that, out of infinite options, that's just one probability that the life exists. So, for the life to come into existence, you need countless things to come together. But this huge universe, and out of, billions and billions of stars, just in one of the planets, there you go, the life can come into existence. So this is a possibility. But again, the mistake they are doing as a engineering calculation, this is a discrete problem. This is a separate problem. Let's say I have the life in the world and it continues, and every second I have different life forms and different members of different species. But in another planet, it's out of my calculation now. It's not affecting my continuous problem. So the formation, the design, bringing together that system here in this planet is a separate problem than I have in another part of the world, in another part of the universe. It doesn't really affect me. It's not a continuous problem. So they take it, the whole thing as one, and then, just, okay, at one point it could be possible that out of, infinite options, here you go, the life came into existence by itself. Why not, Yeah, billions of stars, just we are on one of them, by chance it just randomly came into existence. But no, another star, another planet, another part of the, it doesn't affect me, and every second I have a new creation, and it is different, it is unique. So it is a different problem now. if you know we are talking about a solution in order to come into existence. Just came to my mind from al-Arabi's point. I don't know if it is related.
Yes, yes, definitely, by Karabi, it's also related. I agree. If you think the creation as separate beings, so you will see these solutions are discretized, and it is impossible to devise an algorithm which is going to, let's say, generate this creation in this sense. It would be very difficult.
Brothers, may I please share something really, really quickly?
Sure.
So there was a point that was made about the difference between calligraphy, so writing by hand, versus the printing press. So this actually has a much more political aspect to it. So when you were back in the day, when you can be able to write, and so this is basically the aristocracy. Aristocracy means that you are much more politically connected. You're much more at the higher society only, and then you're literate. So only literate people have access to let's say books. It could be even the Bible and Quran back in the day. So with the printing press, this is much more, it's a democratization. So the printing press made it so it's democratized. So you're able to establish, you're able to spread like the culture and religion to much more of the society, whether it's the middle class, farmer class, all the different classes. This is an aspect of technology, of course. So, of course, like I think this might be relevant. This might be off topic. I'm not sure, but there was this point about writing by hand, by calligraphy, and the means of the methods of printing. So we really should appreciate this printing technology, whether it was made in like the Europeans or the Chinese or anybody else, the Muslim scholars, even writing by hand, because this is the way to reach to the mass amounts of people, to spread knowledge, whether it's knowledge of math and science, whether it's Quranic knowledge. And let's say if you're only able to write by hand, it takes you years and years to print that manuscript, but also who's able to even purchase this? Only the really wealthy and well-connected, whether it's the Pope in Italy, the Roman Catholic people. And it's so much easier to have it much more of a concentration of your knowledge. So this is the reason why Christianity had so many problems throughout Europe, because they had the religious priest class. They would speak in Latin first. Everything is written only by the learned people, and the poor masses of all throughout Europe, Italy, France, and Germany, they're the ones who are sent to go out and go to the Crusades, for example, to the Holy Land, to free the Muslim Holy Lands. So technology played a very crucial role in helping to spread the knowledge, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So this way, everybody has access. So now today's we have our smartphones. Now everybody has the digital Quran in their hands. So I guess the accessibility. Yes.
The difference that I think that would be relevant to here is one is about the popularization of knowledge. Yes. And when we say the popularization of knowledge, we are talking about passing on or distributing the same knowledge to many people, to masses, right? Yes. So the same knowledge is being distributed to the masses. But the analogy that we are trying to make here is to carry that example, that the representation between the script and the printing press, to the reality and the relationship between the reality and God, right? So in that reality, and when we say the reality, we are talking about the book of the cosmos, right? We are not talking about printed or scribed any kind of this kind of book. We are talking about the book of the cosmos. What we are saying is, in the book of the cosmos, between space and time, there is no single manifestation of the divine names and attributes that are the same as the other. I.e., we are not talking about the popularization or propagation of the same thing. What we are talking about is the propagation or continuity or printing, like pressing, impressing of similar but distinct and unique and peculiar things. So it's not the same thing that's being popularized or propagated. I today am not the same as what I was yesterday. There were differences in my thoughts, there were differences in my emotions, there were differences in my mood, there were differences in the chemical composition of my body, there were differences in the number of cells in my body, and so on and so forth. So I'm very different. If you want to like go and parse it out and go into details, I am very different from what I was yesterday or like an hour ago, you know, before I ate and after I ate, right? Or before, when I was standing and when I'm sitting. But at the same time, there is still something that is me, right? There is something that still accounts for continuity, right? Now, that is my reality. When you say Mustafa, you don't mean the, I don't know, like 10 billion cells and, you know, 10 times more than that other living organisms that have come together and that is now raising the hand, now lowering the hand, now making a noise, now staying silent, etc. So that's not what you mean. That's not what, like in the given moment, what you see in front of you. You don't mean the pixels that you see on the screen when you say Mustafa. That those pixels signify Mustafa. Those pixels remind you of Mustafa. Those pixels bring Mustafa to your mind. But when you say Mustafa, you refer to the reality of Mustafa that is continuous, right? So what is that reality? Where do we find that reality, right? So our scholars have said that the reality of things are the names, Asma'ullahul Husna, the beautiful names, because everything receives its possibility of existence and continuity in existence from God's self-disclosure and the manifestation of God's self-disclosure in the sensible, the physical, visible realm that we live. So in that sense, I guess we can, I'm in math, you know, the last thing I did was, you know, functions, I guess, and that was 20, maybe 30 something years ago. Even when you say derivatives, I have difficulty understanding that. However, if I am able to understand what is being referred to in terms of continuity, and I'm trying to find a way to relate that to the reality that we are trying to understand, right? This might be something. If you relate everything to a single source, that in itself, by itself, in its entity is continual, right? Then you can account for the continuity or the seeming visible continuity that you see here, that you knew Mustafa 4 years ago and you still know Mustafa after 4 years. But without that, and this goes to, you know, Imam Ghazali's example of, you know, you put the cotton and the fire together and the cotton burns, but is it the fire that is burning the cotton? You burn the cotton and cotton is burning, and then you know, quench put the fire in water and it's not there anymore. How is it still burning the cotton? So there is something else. Is there a connection between the cotton and the fire? No, there is no connection between the cotton and the fire. It is somewhere else. Or another example to understand this, if I understood the question or the discussion that al-Arabi brought up, another example is you are watching a movie, right? On the screen, you went to the movies, there is some projector back there and it is projecting these images on the screen. And let's say there is a there's a car moving through the screen, and then another car comes from that side and they hit. Now, did two cars hit one another? No. You first saw one image of a car, and then you saw another image of a car, and then you saw a third image of two cars together, smashed together. There was no car, there was no, like, it is not the image that you saw 3 seconds ago that caused the image that you saw 3 seconds later. There is something else that is giving this impression of continuity. These don't exist on the screen. These exist in the projector. And if you take the projector all the way back, if this is a you know, real shooting, it is not a cartoon animation, it was those cars that they drew and shoot with the camera, and that there was a reality to it, right? So it needs to be connected to something that is continuous so that you can account for continuity here. Otherwise, you cannot relate things to one another. But that said, I think the notion of nothing being identical to one another is something that we need to, think in order to understand this. And I'm still trying to understand how in Harnabi's would discreteness mean that nothing is the same with one another in this creation? Not everything is different from what it was 1 second ago or what is over there. And therefore, even though they're like these are all trees, or these are all flowers, or these are all hydrogen molecules or hydrogen atoms, right? They are still different from one another. And given that difference, you cannot account for the relationships between them. You have to find continuity somewhere. Did I understand anything right? Maybe.
Actually, I'm trying to separate, this ehadiyet concept from, for this example's sake. For this example, that's my understanding. Of course, I may be wrong. Ustad gives this example just in the sense of continuity. Just continuity makes everything definitely simpler and easier. I think this example is not to give an example that everything is different. So since everything is different, if you just give the reason to a single source, then you can explain everything being different in an easy way. I don't get this like this. It's I just, in the creation, you see easiness, and you can explain this easiness if you just perceive it as continuous instead of you perceive it as discrete. Like everything is separated and you're concentrating on one thing, then another thing, then you're connecting things. I think this is what is represented by this printing services at his time.
Like, if I may kind of just try to explain, I think like continuity would be like, think of a continuous line, right? If you make a line, it's easy to make one continuous line rather than how many points are on that line. There'd be infinite number of points on a single line, right? So, in order to make a line in that way, make 1 point, the next point, the next point, you would never get to make that line because there would be infinite number of points in the line, right?
That's
so
true. That's an example of
line,
continuity. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's easier to make a continuous line rather than make one by one. So similarly, you started saying that one person, one writer, will be able to continuously write a book, with his wisdom and knowledge, rather than infinite, like small, like individual particles and letters, different letters, and then making so many different things. It's almost impossible. That way, right?
That is close to what I'm trying to pursue, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, and more understandable by non-engineers as well.
Right. Thank you.
So, if we were to carry the example, because we still have the representation and the mathematical model, but what does it correspond to in the reality that we are trying to understand? Can we give this a concrete example from this book of the great book of the cosmos?
Like, for example, in the cosmos, there are so many letters, you could say, in this book of the cosmos. So let's say maybe one life or one being maybe is one letter, or one word, right? Like a human being, let's say it's one word, an animal, another word, and different things are different words, and then each word comprises of different letters. Let's say organs, limbs, these things, and then each of those comprise of smaller particles, parts like chemicals and compounds and elements within those. So there are like the Ustad said, there's words and then letters, and then even those letters can be subdivided into like ya, sin. They could be made into smaller. So you can get smaller and smaller, and there would have to be so many little, parts like pens, for each separate letter to make this book. It would be impossible. Rather than have one writer with one pen write the whole text, the book.
Yeah, I guess another way to put it, to connect the dots, right? What we see in the universe is connectedness, right? Everything is connected, everything is continuous. If you use al-Arabi's terminology, and this is how I get this. Everything is continuous, but if you try to pose this problem or if you try to represent this problem as a discrete parts, or in other words, every single line segment belongs to itself, it needs to be created by itself by different means, and you try to look at this as different pieces coming together. You need to find ways to then connect the dots individually in a way. So in other words, like if the creation is given to causes and different sources of power and different sources of will, different sources of management, then you try to actually connect all these dots instead of seeing a continuous, a complete, a connected picture. But if you see a connected picture, you accept one creator, and optimizing that or finding the connection points, which is the creator, I think is easier. That's how I, how I can understand that example or and that mathematical model and apply to this on my view.
Okay, so shall we keep reading? We don't have too much time, but I think we should still finish this, at least inshallah. Is it fine? Yeah, okay. But if you attribute it to nature, or rather, let's read from the beginning. Likewise, if you say that this great cosmos is inscribed with the pen of a single one, Wahid al-Ahad, you would take an easy and reasonable path, the ease of which reaches a degree of necessariness. But if you attribute it to nature or the causes, and of course this will relate us back to Brother Mustafa's reference to the treatise on nature, because there they come up again, nature, causes, and by itself, right? The path you take would be difficult at the level of untenability and unreasonable at the level of inconceivability, because this would require nature to procure everything that is required for the majority of the cosmos in order to print each living being. Each living being, like one fly, right? But in order for that one fly to be, you need the majority of things in the cosmos. We talked about this before, especially when we talked about life and possessors of life and the giving of life, right? If there is a carbon atom in the body of that fly, that carbon atom has to have been cooked somewhere in a star, somewhere in a galaxy, so that it can now be here. Did Brother Farhan, I think I saw your hand. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was wondering, necessariness, is that same as necessity, or?
No, and I use the word necessariness in order to differentiate from necessity. Let me try to remember what the word that was here was. Yeah, wujub, right? So when we say wajib al-wujub, right, the necessary being, right? However, there is also the word darura, which then can be translated as necessity. So I make that distinction in order to differentiate between the two, but I use the word necessariness because it relates to the more commonly known phrase, the necessary being, wajib al-wujub.
Okay, so that's more emphatic than necessity, more emphatic, more emphasis.
I wouldn't say more emphatic. It is, one relates to the word wajaba, wujub, the other relates to darura. There are two different words which both can be translated as necessary. And when I do my translation, I try to assign a different word to each one of them, because over time, as Ustad Nursi used them again and again, the nuances between the two become clear for the mind, even though we may not be thinking about it. But yeah, well, yeah. Okay. And this is a superstition that even fanciful supposition will not contain and will spit out. What is that supposition? That even fanciful supposition, wahm is the word here, will spit out, right? Attributing that to nature or the causes, right? Why? Because nature does not exist. There's nothing, like nature is not a thing, right? And causes would take us to those type prints that I forgot the word al-Arabi used, discrete. Discrete, okay, yes. Discreteness. So the causes would take us to a discrete realm, because each cause, right, if it is actually existing, right? But in our observation, each cause exists separately. It's not. It doesn't know about the, like, if we are going to think about gravity as the cause of the falling of the apple, right? That is not related to, it is distinct from, right, the cause of buoyance of an object on water, right? So these are not one and the same thing. Or that fire burns is a different, if it is a cause, is a different cause than gravity and this and that. So these are different things. It's like each is typesetting. There is no, as if we to use the same terminology that we came up with today, there is no continuity in there. There's no continuity in agency. They are different things. In fact, either millions of metaphysical printers and even as many invisible machines as the number of flowers and fruits. So here, maybe one thing to emphasize is, it's not, he's not saying, Ustad Nursi is not saying machines as the number of the species of flowers and species of fruits. He's referring to each individual flower, each individual fruit. And that takes us to, Muammar's, Brother Muammar's question, right? If it was species of flowers, you could make one, type, one pattern for every rose flower, and then you could just use it, stamp it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But no, each flower has an individuality, and this is something that will come up later on in Ustad Nursi's writing too, and also in the tradition. Now the other scholars writing, so tashahhus, the personification, right? Individuality, fardiyya. Right? Each flower, each fruit, each human being, each cow, each sheep, each fly, each blade of grass, so on and so forth. You would need as many invisible machines as the number of flowers and fruits will have to exist in every particle of soil, water, and air in order to constitute these flowers and fruits with differing organs and qualities. Why soil, water, and air? Or because when you think of a fruit tree, a flower, plant, that's where it appears to be coming out of: soil, water, air. Or a power that has the power to make all the plants, as well as infinite and all-encompassing knowledge of all the detailed aspects of all the properties of all trees and flowering plants, along with the equipment and measures needed to give shape to them, will have to be assumed to exist in every particle of soil, water, and air. And that's going to be explained in the next paragraph. So I'm not going into detail, because every particle of these three things, air, soil, water, has the capacity to constitute a hotbed for the growth of all plants, or most of them. If you imagine, there in the old world, in Asia, Africa, and Europe, Afro-Eurasia, they did not have tomatoes, right? It came from the Americas. tomato was something that was growing in the Americas, and then a tomato seed traveled all the way from Americas to Afro-Eurasia. Now it's growing everywhere in almost many places in Afro-Eurasia. The soil that's in Asia, the soil that's in Africa, the soil that's in South America, the soil that's in Europe, right? They all have the ability to recognize this tomato seed and turn it into, if it is the soil that's doing it, and turn it into a tomato plant, right? And then it recognizes peach as peach and lentil as lentil and chickpea as chickpea and whatnot. Every particle of these three things has the capacity to constitute a hotbed for the growth of all plants, or most of them. And most of them, it's because different combinations of soil, water, air, and then of course when we say air, we mean climate, etc. too, right? Assume a pot of soil. So Ustad Nursi is now visualizing this for us too and giving us an experiment, right? Is this the age of experimentation and science? And here is the experiment. Assume a pot of soil. Then assume every kernel and seed entering it in turns. Then empty the pot and fill it again from a heap of soil. So there's a pile of soil somewhere. Go take another pot of soil until you go through the entire heap. You will see that the outcome is the same. Each pot of soil will let you grow the same plants. Observation will be sufficient to grasp it. So, but you don't have to do this experiment. Your observation in your life is going to be sufficient to grasp this, because when you travel the earth, you observe that most samples of soil, the word he uses part, but sample works better here. Most parts of soil constitute a hotbed for most plants, even as the form that each flowering or fruit-bearing plant takes is different from another. Again, the emphasis on, yes, similarity, no identicality. Even as the form that each flowering or fruit-bearing plant takes is different from one another. Each one of these plants has an individual and specified orderliness, proportionality, and distinctiveness that require peculiar equipment. So it's not the same type that's being stamping, right? No, each type within it has a different book. Each plant is a different book. Each stamp has to be different. If you assume that, if you assume that this is a stamp, each stamp has to be different, and then each stamp has to be made separately. But if you switch the paradigm, the way you are thinking about this, and give it to a script, give it to a hand that is scribing it, right? That hand, it has the ability to scribe everything. And it did not exist in Ustad Nursi's time, but now we can take the example back to a printer, right? A laser printer or an ink printer, right? If it is a typesetting, it won't work. But if it is the printer that has the ability to move, continuous motion in different directions, right? Then that printer can print all of these. Despite every seed or kernel of the equipment needed to give shape to, oh no, I'm reading the wrong place. Specific machines and a designated print house, right? That require peculiar equipment, specific machines, and a designated print house. In fact, they each require the existence in every seed or kernel of all the equipment needed to give shape to the entirety of the tree or plant, despite the simplicity of the kernels and seeds, along with their mutual resemblance, right? You just, again, try to imagine this from Ustad Nursi's time, right? The genetics is not there yet. When genetics is found, it's going to be even more like revolutionary. It helps us even more. But at that time, take like one grain of wheat, another grain of wheat, and then another grain of wheat. They're so similar and they look so simple. But the wheat plant that comes out of each one of them is similar but different. one is a bit longer, one is a bit shorter, one is a bit wider, one is a bit more bent, one is a bit less bent. One has 100 grains, one has 99 grains, one has 98 grains, right? But you look that they appear to be the same, despite the simplicity of the kernels and seeds along with their mutual resemblance. In that case, nature has to procure, I mean, if it is nature, has to procure metaphysically the equipment by which each thing is constituted along with their metaphysical machines and causes. So it is not enough to print the wheat stalk. You have to make the stamp. If you give it to nature, nature has to make the stamp that's going to make the stalk too. So it's not the wheat stalk that's being made only, but also the stamp that's going to stamp it. Well, then you have to make another stamp to make this stamp. Then you have to make another stamp to make that stamp. So an infinite number of discrete, different, distinct consciousnesses, wills, patterns, molds, agencies you will need. An infinite number of agencies working simultaneously in the same space. You would get chaos. But here you are not getting chaos. Here you are getting, mashallah, harmony. Nature would have to procure metaphysically the equipment by which each thing is constituted along with their metaphysical machines and causes. And this is a sophistry that will discuss even the sophists. So sophists were a group of people in ancient Greek. Their job was usually to teach rhetoric and to politicians. They would teach how to convince the people. If you were to use an analogy, it might be like marketing. What's the marketing science or whatever it is called, right? They were not interested in truth. They were interested in convincing people and getting their votes, right? They're interested in truth. They're interested in selling this product to you. Therefore, anything was okay to say. Later on, over time, it became the name of a philosophical movement that we can today associate like skepticism, and also it came to be related to this word sophistry, which means nonsense, basically, right? And this is a nonsense that will discuss even the sophists, or a superstition that will shame even those who make people laugh by narrating superstitions, like a clown or something. So it's 10:33. I tried to go a bit fast over these two paragraphs. I suggest that, and people may have things to say, but I don't know if we can hold you here any longer. I suggest that if you have anything that you want to add to this, it can be a longer discussion, ask, add, comment, object, whatever. Please make a note, and let's take from there next week, asking, do you want to add something to last week's discussion? Would that work?
Inshallah, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good. Sounds like
Okay, inshallah. So if you have to, hold yourself until next week, I apologize from now. Jazakumullah khairan to everybody. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim wa akhir da'wahum alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Al-Fatiha.